Dennis,
Yes.
I'm surprised by the way the market's reacting today because one might have concluded from a weak jobs number, a disappointing jobs report, which we got, that the Fed is going to go out and do a new bond buying program.
Right. The old bad news is good news
Bad
idea.
news is good news, or at least bad news kind of ameliorates some of the sting that you get from seeing really dismal
Right.
unemployment report. But that's not the way they took it.
Right. You've been preparing a piece for WSJ.com.
Yeah.
Tell us, one, how the market took it, and two, where the Fed goes from here, because this is such a central question for the stock market overall.
I mean, I think the very straightforward answer is that today's report showed there's little progress on the employment front, and that raises the likelihood that the Fed is going to be back in the market with a new bond buying program, a QE3, if you will. And it's not a sure thing. It's not a slam dunk. There's still have a lot of data that they want to look at. There's still some internal resistance. But the core of the decision makers at the Fed want to see progress on bringing unemployment
Right.
down.
Now, John, you're one of the
and we're
best.
not seeing it.
You're one of the best Fed watchers in the business, and this seems to me that you're suggesting that sentiment has turned. An 80,000 job print just isn't enough to get it done. But it does raise the next question, which is, yes, the Fed can do things, but how much of a difference does it really make in the economy overall? Have we reached a point of diminishing returns?
That's a question that they're going to be arguing, that they've been arguing about for a couple of years now, and that they're certainly going to be arguing about when they meet July 31st and August 1st. What good is all of this going to do? They talk in Fed speak about costs and benefits. But, the Fed chairman, I asked him this actually at his last press conference, and his view is that when the Fed buys bonds, it eases financial conditions. It brings down long-term interest rates. It pushes investors into stocks. He won't say this, but he also believes it helps to weaken the dollar. And that those kinds of financial reactions help to spur investment spending and growth.
Right. Now, of course, we've seen a number of, on the mortgage sector, a number of refinancings. But you have to ask yourself the question, John, if I'm not buying a house with a 3.75% mortgage or a 3.5% mortgage, is a 3.25 mortgage really going to make the difference? It seems, I've thought a lot about asymptotes, right? And are we hitting an asymptote of what interest rates can do for an economy at this point?
Yeah. Well, it's two points. One is that you have to look at how these things work on the margin. There might be 10 potential borrowers out there. Maybe one of those 10, there's one of those 10 for whom it will push you over. It is enough to get you to take that step because it reduces the cost of owning a home. So on the margin, it might help, and they're always looking on the margin. The other thing I should say, though, is that they are very aware at the Fed that their policies aren't working the way they would hope that they work.
Aren't working.
That the credit channel, as they say, is dysfunctional right now, which is another way of saying banks don't want to lend. Not only banks don't want to lend, but banks are not refinancing the mortgages of a lot of people who come to them and say we want to refinance for a lot of different reasons. It's gummed up. The plumbing in the system is gummed up, and that's something that gives them a lot of
Now,
pause.
the banks would say, of course, that the regulatory response from the very same crisis is forcing them to take higher lending standards and forcing them to be a little bit more circumspect on those lending decisions. And on top of that, of course, is the capital requirements from international banking agreements that are pushing and keeping the money inside their vaults.
Well, I would say the bigger issue here, certainly banks would make those arguments. I would say the bigger issue here is Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which no one has, well, at least no one in the Obama administration has tried to address in the last 4 years. Fannie and Freddie are impeding bank lending right now because banks are afraid to take on any new mortgage risk because they don't think Fannie and Freddie will take those mortgages. They're supposed to be government guaranteed, but there's always a risk that Fannie and Freddie will put them back on them. So you have a log jam in the mortgage market, which is really impeding the ability of these low interest rate policies of the Fed. Right. It's impeding their effectiveness, and I don't think many people would disagree with that.
We had this conversation earlier, John, and I'm of the belief that it's perhaps not the Fed that can make the most difference right now for the U.S. economy. It's Congress, the president, both political parties who are in a terrible years-long logjam over what we call the grand bargain.
Right.
The ability to solve the long-term budget problems of the United States government. My belief is if those guys can strike a deal, the economy, the stock market, things will get unhitched or ungummed, as you might put it. And that's far more effective than whatever the Fed can do on the margins.
You know who agrees with you 100%?
Tell
Ben
me.
Bernanke.
Right.
Ben Bernanke agrees with you. He's practically begging these guys whenever he goes up to Congress, and he's going up in another couple of weeks, and he's going to do it again, practically begging them to come up with a sensible fiscal policy in which the long deficits are contained in the long run, but in the short run, they're not pulling back too quickly because that could hurt the economy. He's been saying it for 4 years. What's really dispiriting about the world we live in right now is that we all understand the right economic policy, but the political actors, Democrats and Republicans, you know, the Obama administration and the House cannot get together, overcome their differences, and make this happen.
Yes, they're failing us, and in an election year, we can't expect much from them, especially at the end of the year when we have a big negotiation on tax policy.
They're failing us. We can't expect much of them through November. The real worry that I've got is, are they going to be able to overcome these differences after November? And, you know, I think there's reason to be doubtful.